Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So, I have the pleasure of welcoming you all today to hear from local artist Luz Donahue, whose work is currently on view at NUMU until June 26th, which is this Sunday. We hope that you come visit the museum and follow along Luz's artistic journey. Next slide. I'd like to start off today with a land acknowledgement. Despite this program being virtual, we acknowledge that New Museum Los Gatos sits on the ancestral land of the Ohlone, the Tamian Ohlone, and the Muwekma Ohlone people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We recognize their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on their traditional homeland. We pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people, past, present, and future as well. And I invite you all to visit nativeland.ca, which is a wonderful resource that you can find out whose native land you are on, where you live, where you work. So without further ado, Luz's work is on view at NUMU as part of our series called In the Artist Studio, which highlights the studios, practices, and artistic journeys of local artists in the Bay Area. So we invite you to all come visit. We're open on Saturdays and Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Later in the program, we will have a Q&A facilitated by our lovely curator, Julie Erickson. And so if you have any questions during the program, please drop them in the chat and we will ask them for you on your behalf. Live captions are available during the program. And if you wish to disable them, you can click the CC little box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass it off to Luz.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you for spending this time with me and taking this meandering stroll through my psyche with me. My name, again, is Luz Donahue. I am an artist. I consider myself a creative instigator, and I hope I'll do a little bit of that poking for you today. And I also consider myself kind of a student of the future. I think a lot of artists kind of spend their time connecting dots and trying to figure out how what we do in our practice can make things better in some way, shape, or form for others. And this is what I think I've learned in years, maybe since 2013, 2014, of making abstract paintings. This entire talk conversation today I'm seeing as something very open and collaborative. So at any point, if you have a question, just kind of like jump in and share it. And Julie and Michelle will make sure that it gets to me. This is a picture from the current exhibit at NUMU. If you want to see the whole thing, you're going to have to go there this weekend. And again, this is our very last weekend. So, please make the time to go out and see them in person, because it is a very different experience. Something that I want to share just about the concept of In the Artist Studio as a series, and related to the conversation that we're having today, is when we look at the process of other people's work and we look and see how other people have put together that process, it can sometimes help us to see how we might be able to reorient our resources and our time and our attention toward our own process. It can also be really intimidating when you look at another artist and you see that they have a really clear process. You might think, like, how did they come up with that? Or how am I going to do something even remotely similar to that? And that's not at all how I want you to see any of this conversation, or just in general other people's practices. Because when we start to do that kind of comparing thing, we turn off the fun. And the fun is one of the things that I'd like to focus on today. And on the right here, or my right, it should be your right, we see Alex, who currently has Retazos, the large exhibit at NUMU, which you should also go see this weekend. And he's kind of playing around here with a little pipette and a little bit of colored water. I'll share a little bit more about the specifics of my process, but what we did is we essentially created a space for the community to be able to participate in this single process so that all of us are together creating a piece of art. And this is also in that same exhibit. So drop by and make sure you leave your mark before this closes. I think a beautiful thing about the way that we can talk about process is that it's not really something that's entirely about us all together. In making things, we are creating space for other people to also experience them. And something that I feel has really brought a lot of awareness to that is allowing other people to participate in my work in this way and in other ways. Once we see that we're not really just creating for ourselves, that there's kind of a collective outcome, I think that can make this process a lot more fun and feel like a lot more meaningful. So with that, you should go this weekend, and I'll jump into a little bit more, kind of prepare you for what we're gonna do. So in the next few minutes, what I'd like to do is just share with you kind of how I got here, first of all, and then what I've observed in the process of just making literally hundreds of abstract paintings and teaching other people how to paint in the way that I paint. I am not a formally trained artist. I don't have like an art school approach because I don't have an art school background. I do things in a very intuitive way, and I talk a lot about things that maybe seem a little bit woo-woo. I talk a lot about things like intuition or, kind of channeling your emotional state, but I consider myself very much like a secular practitioner. I don't see myself as a new age person. I very much try to, stay grounded. And what I've learned through this process is that there's not like one way of defining all of these kind of like buzzwords of the day, things like mindfulness, and things like a spiritual practice. So with that, I want to share with you this quote. This is from Robert Greene. Robert Greene is famously known for the 48 Laws of Power, but he also wrote a book called Mastery, where he studied masters of their craft. And essentially he went through and figured out how did each of these people, who is the master of dance, the master of architecture, he goes through like Charles Darwin and all kinds of other scientists, what did they do in their arc of becoming that allowed them to do things in a different way? And what he ends up at is that essentially most of these people took their inclinations and interests and then leaned them all together so that over time, all of their inclinations and interests wove into one practice. We are all in search of feeling more connected to reality, to other people, the times that we live in, the natural world, our character, our own uniqueness. Our culture increasingly tends to separate us from these realities in various ways. We indulge in drugs or alcohol or engage in dangerous sports or risky behavior just to wake ourselves from the sleep of our daily existence and feel a heightened sense of connection to reality. In the end, however, the most satisfying and powerful way to feel this connection is through creative activity. Engaged in the creative process, we feel more alive than ever because we are making something and not merely consuming, masters of the small reality we create. In doing this work, we are in fact creating ourselves. We are in fact creating ourselves. So I am a really big fan of being careful when we talk about perception or what reality is, because we live in this world where what is fact is becoming somewhat tenuous. And I think as we start to talk about the fact that we all really do have completely different perceptions of our realities, and we start to acknowledge that in fact it is only the small reality around us that we can truly affect, this can be actually pretty empowering, especially when things start to get really difficult and we start to feel like the world around us is changing by the minute. So to me, when I think about my practice and the art that I'm able to create and what I do when I teach, that's me affecting my own reality to the capacity that I have with the resources that I have. This is, I'd like to show you the oldest painting that I think I have. I made this when I was about 4 years old. My mom used to do watercolor kind of to like relax after work, and she went through many crafts. I think she knits now, you know, and she's done all kinds of other things. But the fight that we would have would be that I wanted to play with her like fancy watercolors, and she had me with the little Crayola set and I wanted the fancy ones, and we'd have this like back and forth until eventually she kind of gave in and she taught me how to watercolor so that I would not ruin her paints. And in that process, I had no idea. Obviously, I was a child, but when I was 10 years old, we moved to the US. And I don't know if you've ever been in a position or in a situation where you could not communicate with somebody, either because you didn't speak the language or because you were talking past each other. But that was my experience until I was about 13 years old. You know, it took about 2 to 3 years for me to get to a point where I was competent and confident in English to communicate and navigate the world. But through images, there's no language. Through the experience of watercolor, of moving a brush and into paint and across paper, suddenly it didn't matter that I couldn't language the way that I was supposed to in order for people to get me. Everybody knows what a butterfly looks like, and everybody knows what a flower looks like. And that was a way that I could kind of take back some of that power and express myself, which is so important, especially when you're growing up and especially when you're removed from the world that you knew. So as I was growing up, it seemed the ultimate dream to just make art for work, to be a person that had a day in and day out that involved continuing to do this, because that's where I felt most in control and that's where I felt most empowered. And so when that finally happened, I didn't end up doing something that I could have ever predicted that I was going to go do. I ended up working in portraiture. These are some of the portraits that I made. And I was working with, you know, sometimes it was people and sometimes it was people's pets. And I love this. I love this work because I was doing my absolute favorite thing every day. But unfortunately, we all have limitations. Mine was, I've got some joint issues that I didn't know about. And so when I was about 24, 25, I just got like one too many commissions one Christmas, and my entire arm became inflamed, and I was literally in so much pain that I couldn't like turn a doorknob or open a jar, let alone do these very small, you know, repetitive hatchwork pieces that you're seeing here. And I literally thought I had like found my dream and had it snatched from me. And I thought there just was never going to be a way for me to like live a life that didn't involve painting, because that was what I knew to be kind of like my fun and my joy and my escape. And if you took all of that away from me, I just kind of felt trapped again. So I started to kind of play around in my studio with the idea of, what if I only do what I can do in 2 or 3 seconds? Because these pieces, obviously, they take like weeks and they take a lot of repetitive motion and a lot of time. But what if I could do something kind of like how I would play when I was a kid, and I would come in and find something and kind of make a couple of marks, and when I got bored, I would just walk away. I'm sure you've all seen kids play with watercolors or paints or whatever in their own time. If they're not structured at school, they'd kind of just do it until the dopamine's gone and then they move on to something else. And so doing that, what I ended up coming up with was this pattern, this like series of shapes that turned into all of these things that you're seeing here. These are actually kind of my first attempts You can see these are from 2014. And in the beginning, they were kind of cell-like, and you can probably see some jellyfish and some kind of sea creature vibes in them. And then when this worked out, I did even more of them. And I started out with very small pieces of paper, and I would just do a wash in one color one day. And then I would come back another day and I would do some marks in dark blue. And I would do this across all of the different pieces of paper that I had. And so it wasn't so much trying to design something or trying to force something into being something. It was just, what do I need to play with today to feel like I made something, to feel like I expressed a little bit? Because in that time, I thought that was not going to be a possibility unless I could do it in 2 minutes a day tops, let alone what my physical therapist would have thought about me trying to do any more. Excuse me. So this kind of started to become its own thing. And once I started to see that these images were becoming things without me, this is from 2017 now. So now we're like 3 years in, and you can start to see some of the shapes stay and some of them go away and kind of come back. To me, it became like this addiction, because it was like reading a book where the back of the book is absolutely blank until you turn one page. So you turn one page and it adds one page. And so there's like an ending coming for some of these that I could see, and I could see them kind of like shape shifting into more ethereal things or more complicated things. And as the shapes kind of started to do what they wanted to do, I still could just continue to start new things and end things. And it felt like this really free space where I could just let my mind do whatever it needed to do. And over a long time of doing this, I developed the ability to just sit down in front of a piece of paper, choose one color, make 3 marks, not think about it at all, and move on to another piece of paper until at this point in my current studio, I probably have 200 pieces going right now that are in different levels of completion. At that time, I was just kind of doing whatever came up. And then I would maybe go on a trip and the colors would change a little bit, or I maybe would get into the garden a lot, and then I would start showing up with a lot of greens. And then 2020 happened. And right before the pandemic was announced, I had really taken to teaching very seriously. So I had several contracts out of state, some in LA, some in different parts of the state and the area. The last place that I taught at before the pandemic was actually NUMU. And I thought that I had once again like figured it out. Like I'm gonna teach these like mindfulness painting workshops, and then that's gonna be the thing. That's gonna be the ticket. And then a pandemic came, and I have asthma, and I'm on an autoimmune medication, and there were just a lot of reasons that I needed to be very, very careful. So all of my contracts got canceled, and I just was like, okay, well, we're back in this situation again. And I was so overwhelmed just by everything that the pandemic meant and by everything that came after, and the way that people responded, and just trying to understand even my role in things, that all I could do was like, what if I just paint all these little black squares like one color? And this was like, had nothing to do with the black square, but this was just, I have a tub of black paint, I have little squares, I don't know why, but I'm like drawn to this color, and this is what I like need to do. And I did this with probably 40 wood panels, some of which I'm still working on now. And through 2020, I made a small series called Resilience. Once these paintings were finished, what I did was I just went back and thought, what are the things that are sustaining me? Like, as I'm thinking through what has been difficult for me, like what are the things that I'm going back as I'm finishing these paintings, what do I think of when I look at this? And so, you know, something as simple as the knowing of impermanence, that I know that things are impermanent, that I now with age have gotten to a place where that's my expectation. There's some peace in that, even though it's a little bit scary. This was actually the first painting that I showed at NUMU. That was kind of my introduction to the community at NUMU. And to me, there's something just kind of beautiful about the fact that that was like the last place that I taught. And then also there was a show called Art in the Time of Corona, where I got to show this piece specifically because as that whole experience happened, I think it became really clear how important it is for us to kind of do things in community and have conversations around these like big feelings that come up. So that has become kind of the method of expression for me, is I will go through these images and I'm not planning what they're going to turn out to be. I just kind of create a space where I allow my mind to do the thing, to choose something, to be drawn to it, to move with it. A term that you like may or may not have heard is automatism, and that's essentially tuning into my body so that it almost is a machine in a sense. Perhaps the process itself is the machine, the opening up of this state where I can kind of confidently lean on a color or a shape and really allow that to open itself up onto the paper. And then the step back that I take when I'm editing that and looking at it and interacting with it in an unconscious way as these things develop, to me, the the process is about creating a day-to-day where I have a way to plug into that practice. So when I sit down to paint, there isn't anything in my head that's going, how am I going to convey to people um, the state of my consciousness right now? Or how am I going to convey to people how I see a specific thing that's happening out in the world? To me, when I sit down to paint, I'm literally just going, how do I want to play right now? And what does my body want to touch and feel? And what sensations are going to like hit the spot right now? And when I stop with that one medium, it's because I've ran out of the like dopamine, I've ran out of the fun. It's not exciting anymore. I don't see it making sense for me. I want something else that's going to give me that feeling. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just chasing this feeling. So the idea that I am the algorithm, to me, is like if an algorithm is going through and it is selecting kind of like things, similar things, and it is bringing them up at the right time, if it's a formula for how to make choices, um, this is how I see my own mind. As I am traveling and seeing colors shift, because the colors are different in every town that you go, and suddenly teal and turquoise are more on my mind. To me, that's just like the algorithm filtering through all of the information that's coming in different ways. And I think, to me, when I was sitting there painting all these black squares, it wasn't so much like an obvious image of like, oh no, depression. But I think there's a lot that can come out of darkness that's positive. And I think about images like the night sky. When we close our eyes and we imagine things and we are superimposing onto the darkness behind our eyes an imagery, a light. Um, and those are only things that I can tell you and explain after I've made the painting. They're not things that I'm going into the painting with intention for. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to do process. I'm just simply stating that in that there is this spectrum. There is this spectrum where one artist might show up and have 18 sketches for one part of one painting that's abstract. And then there's another place where I see myself that's kind of over here, that's almost all the way to like just pure unconscious movement. And where we land in creating our own processes really is about the comfort that we feel and whether we are feeling that joy and that fun while creating, because that is what sustains that state of flow. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about play and flow. Here's another quote I'm going to read to you. And I hate it when people do presentations and show quotes, but this is how I'm going to remember it. This is from Stuart Brown, who is kind of one of the foremost scientists on the subject of play and how it affects our brain and our day-to-day. If you want to read a book that will kind of kindly guilt you into doing more play, this is a very good one. And I'll just read this now. I have gathered and analyzed thousands of case studies that I call play histories. I have found that remembering what play is all about making it part of our daily lives. Are probably the most important factors in being a fulfilled human being. The ability to play is critical not only to being happy, but also to sustaining social relationships and being a creative, innovative person. So I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like we're in the middle of kind of shifting our relationship to work. I don't know what that's going to look like, what the outcome of the movements that we're in the middle of now are going to look like 5 or 10 years down the road. But I know personally, I grew up hearing that hard work was the only way through, that hard work was the only moral way through, that in order for us to achieve a happy and fulfilled life, we had to just really put it all in there. And although I think that definitely a creative practice is hard work in a way, I think it's also really important to find joy in the day-to-day of what we're doing. And what I'm learning as I learn more about play and the way that it affects our capacity to enter that state of flow is that the moment that things become unfun, that is the moment that we're closing the door to this like elusive state that we're all chasing, right? People in lots of different contexts talk about creativity being important and innovation being important and flow state being something that's necessary to those things. But we're not always really talking about how we entered that state. And what I've learned, and this is to me like a spiritual truth, what I've learned is that without fun, without truly understanding what is fun for us, we can't really enter that state. And as I've taught classes and I've spent time with students, what I find is one of the most useful ways to walk them through my specific process. And again, that's my process. So it's not that everything can be done this way, but I find that when we're painting and we're doing this layered thing where we're choosing one tool at a time, and I'm teaching students to compartmentalize that way, when I tell them to stop making decisions if they're not fun anymore, something shifts for them. And so what that means to me is once we reach a point where we're in a state of frustration as to the decision that we're making, we can just get another piece of paper and we can start something else, and we can let that frustration kind of set aside and simmer. This is a little diagram that I kind of made up the other night thinking, how do I explain why this is important? And I want to be really clear that I'm not of the camp of intuition is more important than rationality. And I'm not of the camp that rational thinking is more logical than intuition. I actually feel like there's a lot of cognitive components at play in intuition, some of which is, could be like confirmation bias, and some of it can be, just an internalized knowing. And I think that both of these tools, this is also one of the things that Robert Greene talks about in the book Mastery, if you want to look into that one. I think we have grown up in a world that was so, STEM forward, that it may sometimes give us the impression that what we can come up with when we're in this like joy state doesn't have an equal value to what we can come up with when we're in our most like analytical, kind of critical state. And what I like to think about in terms of those two distinctions is that it's more like a gas pedal and a brake. So we've got two different pedals that we're working with. And if the goal that we have in front of us is to make an abstract painting in this process, then the driver of that project is going to be a little bit further up this pyramid. It's going to be probably your playful exploration. If you're not too comfortable, if you're very comfortable with kind of intuitive approaches to abstract painting, then you're probably going to be at the very top of this pyramid. And so what you're seeing is like language to languageless thinking that's going from I'm reading the book is explaining to me the facts, I am internalizing those facts, I'm learning the dates and times, into analytical thinking, which is I am now taking the facts that I've learned and I am drawing my own conclusions and connections, and I'm trying to analyze how these relate to each other. I'm still very language focused in my brain, right? There's a lot of words that I'm going to need in order to explain that to myself. And then there's a point of mindful interaction, which is what I'm calling kind of the state of, okay, now that I have read the facts and I have analyzed the facts, maybe I can engage with this in a more, slow, deliberate, taking a look at it way. This would be in painting, if I'm going to use painting as an example, where I'm maybe looking at something that I've started and I'm giving it some space and I'm just kind of taking a look and taking in what I see. Playful exploration is back at that point where like now I'm just figuring out what this could be, or like now I'm thinking about how far I can push a motif or push a line or do something new. In this intentional observation state, I'm now just kind of taking it in. This is like the people watching. And I'm not necessarily feeling anymore like I need to describe what it is that I'm seeing, because I'm just taking it in. I am exploring the way that the water moves across the paper. I'm not trying to even find anything out, or there's nothing on the other side of it. It's just kind of happening and I'm there with it. Perhaps you could say it's like one with the moment. And then once we get to this like languageless experiencing place, those are the moments where you might feel that after you've been meditating for a long time, or if you go on like a long hike alone, or anytime that you're just kind of sitting with yourself and you're just kind of being, and there's no, there's like big internet meme, like, no thoughts. When you have that moment where you can just be all vibes, no thoughts, and you're just experiencing what is in front of you, it feels like you're not really doing anything, but you're creating white space for all of those other things to take shape, and you're creating room for your mind to kind of bake everything else that you've been taking in. So if you're not taking in all of this additional information, all of a sudden there's room in your unconscious mind for all of these things to start forming into something. And so I tell you all of this because I feel like there's both narratives out there. One is, you should do things intuitively, go with your heart and your gut, and like that's all that matters. And then on the other side, there's another narrative that says no, we have to do everything logically, we have to do everything by the numbers and how it's been done before. And I feel like the power in humanity is that we actually have a choice. We get to decide how much of each of those sides we want to take on, and we get to decide when and how we want to employ um, each one of those ways of being. And that's what's really cool, is like, if you can actually choose, how would you choose? Because I don't think we get taught really to make a decision as to whether we're going to approach something from a place of intuition and flow, or if we're going to approach something from an analytical place. This is like a thing that we learn through adulting kind of on our own. It's not like a class in school on like how to like hijack your consciousness for the like best possible outcome. So what are maybe the not so great things about looking at the world from just a purely rational place? And again, I'm not anti rational thinking. I'm just saying, if we take only a rational approach to things, we can start getting into these habits of saying things are a specific way without leaving room for change. And the reality is that our inner self is changing all the time as we consume more information, as we have more experiences, as we age, as we have more interactions with other people. And so we can't really look at everything as though we're going to stay the same forever. And we might end up internalizing some ideas around what creativity means, around what it means to play. And some of those ideas might be like, well, play is something that you only get to do after you've done your homework. So that means that now I worked a 50-hour week and I'm not going to like give myself a day off to go do something fun, because there's also laundry and these other things to do that are more important. And we start to deprioritize these things that put us in those states of play, of joy, of just pure human experiencing, because they're not productive, because they're not generating status or commercial outcome. We could also get into this habit of saying things like, well, I'm this kind of creative, I'm not this kind of creative. I can do this kind of learning, I can't do this kind of learning. For me, one of the ways this has like manifested, and it's such a joke now, when I was in school, I remember, and I found my like little, there's the like state testing that they do, and I was in the 99th percentile for math in 5th grade. Something happened between 5th grade and high school, and when I got to high school, I thought I could not make it past geometry. Like, there was no way that I was ever going to make it past geometry. And then in my career, my other career as a marketer, fast forward to now, and I've built it on my capacity to read analytics and to look at data and to build stories from data, which is statistics. And imagine what could happen, to somebody where you get to a point where you're like, I'm incapable of taking in this knowledge, but then finding another way through to that knowledge through story or through something else that does feel like, well, I can do story. And so because I can tell stories, I can learn this information. There could have been a much faster route through all of this if I didn't internalize the information that maybe it was, girls don't do math, or maybe it was something else. Maybe I had a teacher that was unkind. There's all kinds of things that happen like that. And I see this in my classes a lot too when it comes to creativity. There's lots of people that I've taught that will come up to me really quietly after class and say, I've always wanted to paint, but then I had this teacher who was like really mean to me when I was in 2nd grade, when I was in 3rd grade, and or people who have also said things to me about professors in art schools that say mean things to them, or whatever it is. It gets easier for us if we start to be rigid about our thinking, to take this external feedback and to internalize it as like who we are. And that's just, again, there's lots of place for rational thinking, for structure, for expertise, that the matters. But we also need to have a little bit of room for kind of going, wait a minute, why can't I learn that? Or why can't I be that kind of creative? Or what would be wrong with taking up ceramics? Like, why shouldn't I take up ceramics this weekend? Or, you know, whatever it is that is kind of floating around in our consciousness. And so one of the things that as I do this work, and I do this kind of on my own, and then I bring it into workshops or classes or whatever, what I hope to do is to kind of like loosen that up a little bit, so that hopefully as we go into our day to day, we start to feel a little bit more open to possibility, which I think is the thing that brings creativity, you know, into being, is just that openness to possibility, so that we do let ourselves enter that state of play, and so that we do put down the fear a little bit. And just, you know, again, it's about balance. It's not that one perspective is wrong versus the other, but through a balanced perspective, we can see the idea that there is an infinite amount of things that I could figure out and be good at, and that perhaps I need a different avenue toward a particular piece of knowledge than the one that I've been exposed to. And maybe that's the reason that something is difficult. Or even just trusting in ourselves and our own capacity to push through something because our intuition is telling us that we can. Having the capacity to come to those creative solutions through that state of flow is going to be dependent on our ability and our willingness to make sure that fun is part of our self-care and our wellness, just like doing the dishes, just like doing the laundry. It is going to have to be a regular practice, again, making room for that changing self. So these are things that I've already touched on somewhat, but this idea that you know, like fun is for closers, like the coffee is for closers, or this idea that having a spiritual practice, you know, that mindfulness looks like sitting on a cushion and being perfectly still, even if you have ADHD, or even if you have aching bodies, you know, it's necessary for us to find our own process and our own path to these things. And if one of these things works for you, awesome, right? Like embrace that. But I just want to kind of open up the possibility that if we're taught that, you know, creativity is for some people and not for me, or if we were taught that and then we overcame it and became creative people, but now we feel guilty about the time that we spend doing that creative work, we can start to question that just by spending a little bit more time kind of in those top areas of that pyramid, right? Like doing a little bit more intentional, playful exploration, doing a little bit more to just be. And I think, you know, as I share with you some of the work that I've done, and again, I'm titling these after I'm making them, but this one I ended up calling I Can't See My Own Vantage Point. And that to me kind of came after I realized that when I was in the middle of everything in 2020, and I came out of it, you know, 2021 was like trying to, I can't even tell you that I'm like over 2020 now, but when I was thinking about that time, I saw just very clearly how much I thought I understood where I was with myself in terms of understanding the nuances of our culture in a lot of different ways, or understanding my own role. And I really, when you're standing at the vantage point, you can't see it from above unless you're actually taking the time to create the space to see it from above, or to reflect upon where you're actually standing. And so if we operate with the knowledge that we don't necessarily know where we're sitting, that there's a lot more possibility that we're not really accessing, and we are not afraid of that. That's the key, is like to not be afraid of that unknown, then we can start to play and explore. If anybody has any comments, by the way, I know like I've talked a lot for a long time. So feel free to like chime in with your comments and your questions. I personally feel like the more that we center play, the more that we start to realize that this is actually the most natural way for us to learn. So when we talk about play as wellness, it's not just that you're going to blow off steam, because you will, play. Anytime we do anything that we consider playful, we do de-stress. But it's the fact that teachers know this. Teachers know that when you're stressed, you're not going to take in information, and you're also not going to do very good problem solving. So finding a rhythm of being able to continue to play is largely about that, about you having the capacity to take in information and really move through it really quickly and internalize it really quickly. This book, which I'll probably reference again, but by Stuart Brown, called Play, one of the things that he talks about in terms of what it does for us is it is actually our gateway to resilience. So when he talks to somebody who is he's the foremost expert in play in adults, and he speaks with somebody, I forget his name, who's also the foremost expert in play in animals, and then they have this meeting, and he's like, tell me what you think the evolutionary reason for play is. And the guy's like, there's no like reason. He's like, no, but why do we play? Why do we keep doing it? Why do all animals do it? And the guy's like, well, what these bears are doing when they're wrestling each other in the forest is they're really just preparing for when they're going to have to defend themselves. So in this moment, there's no reason for it. They're just doing it for funsies. That's the point, is to do it for funsies. But when we're doing things for funsies, inevitably, we're also preparing ourselves for a similar situation that we may not be able to foresee. So this creates self-trust, and this creates a feeling of, I know how I'm going to navigate things when I get there. So when asked, what is play? The editor of the American Journal of Play, I just want to point out that play is so important that there's literally a scientific journal dedicated to play. So something for you to go check out. It says it's a process, it's not a thing. It begins with anticipation and hopefully ends in poise. And in between, you find surprise, pleasure, and understanding, as well as skill and empathy, strength of mind, body, and spirit. So what this may look like for you, it's probably going to be very different than what it looks like for me, but take some time, and I'll give you some little journal questions at the end that you can use to orient yourself and figure out, like, how can I add more play into my life? Because chances are we're not doing it enough. I love this definition by Stuart Brown, where he says play is a state of being that is purposeless, pointless, fun, and pleasurable. So with that definition, if you were to look at the things that you're doing in your day-to-day, I wonder how many things are actually play that you're not labeling that way, and how many things could become more playful if you maybe didn't feel like so rushed to get all the dishes done so fast, or whatever pressure it is that you're putting on. This is another piece from that 21 series, and again, you can see these at New Moo this weekend. It is in the mystery of it. The fun is in the play of it, in the not knowing, in the figuring out. And I really feel like one of the big discoveries that I've made through making hundreds of abstract paintings is that thirst for what is it going to turn into? Like, where is this all going? Because there is a very connected lineage in time that I can look through, and I can find these connections, and then I can try to make meaning from those connections. But the joy, the spice, the life in it is literally in the fact that I don't know where it's going, in that mystery. So I invite you into that mystery. And I want to remind you that I'm not special. I'm not special, and your favorite artists, they're also not special. Everybody who creates things, you know, we just really get focused and we add to that lineage. And so as a human being, you are a creative vessel. You can do all of these things. It's just a matter of pointing that energy in a direction that you like, that feels fun to you, that is fulfilling to you. And that's an immense power. Like, you can literally just take that energy and point it towards something that brings you joy, and just doing that will make you more creative and a better problem solver at work. Like, will make you the person to go to for innovation in your space, because you have a playful, creative, and fun practice. You can open that up in yourself a little bit more and a little bit more each week. um, so don't ever feel, you know, discouraged or frustrated if you start to work on something and it maybe doesn't look how you want it to look, because it's not about creating something that is perfection. It's not about creating something that looks how you wanted it to look. It's really about the process of enjoying what you're doing and what you're making. Um, and, you know, one of the things that I like to go to is language as a tool for reframing. So when I see people getting frustrated in my classes, when I see them wrestling with what a lot of people call the inner critic, I like to label that as just your inner analyst. So there is a voice inside that's going, I don't like the way this is all turning out. What that voice wants to do, it's trying to protect you in some way. So it maybe thinks that the correct way or the right way for you to do whatever it is that you're doing looks different than what you're doing. But if, again, your goal is to play or to do something that necessitates flow, then the analyst, he's not really in charge. Like, he might be there, but it's not really his time to like run the show. And if you're conscious of that and you label that your analyst, you can kind of just put it down for a second and be like, excuse me, it's like flow time right now. Can we come back? You know, we can put that piece of paper away, we can put that project away and step back from the frustration, or we can just like decide that that frustration doesn't matter and push forward. But with just that reframing, I think we can do a lot in our creative practices to allow some more of that fun in.
Luz, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I know we're kind of getting to the last like 8 minutes now, and this has been wonderful. I'm so kind of inspired by the way your practice really includes encouraging other young, like emerging artists and other artists in their own exploration of play and things like that. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe how you found yourself in that position as an instigator and a leader and a teacher?
Sure. Wow. Okay. Well, I've always liked teaching. So early on in my career as a marketer, I found myself somehow teaching workshops. Like, I just became that I would learn something and I would want to teach it. And that's just like always how I move through the world. I was raised by a teacher, so I think that might have something to do with it. And I think when I got to the point where I realized that I had merged my physical limitations, my ADHD, and my worldview into like this neatly packageable little process, it didn't make sense for me not to share it. I felt like that idea that, you know, maybe through some kind of an example of how that could be done, I could add to somebody's practice or open up or create more space for somebody else's practice. That feels to me more exciting than somebody like buying one of my paintings. It just seems like a more high impact, and it is my fun. And that's another thing too, is like that moment when you're talking to somebody about something that you love, that they feel the slightest discomfort with, or even, you know, some people are like genuinely like afraid to paint, like who come to my workshops. And the moment where you see that shift in their eyes and, you know, they're looking around like, oh man, I remember, this is, I know we're like close, so I don't want to tell too many stories, but I remember really distinctly one of the first workshops that I taught, there was an older gentleman, I think probably late 60s, and he felt like, the vibe felt very much like dragged here on date night by his wife, like probably wouldn't have come here on his own, kind of discomfort. And he was just like very uptight, you know, the first like 30 minutes. And as the workshop started to progress, he kind of like let go and was just doing his own thing. And I thought, okay, great, he's not going to be like grumpy that he's here. And at the end of the class, he came up to me and I thought, oh no, he's like really unhappy, right? And he pulls me aside and he's like, actually, I had like a really mean teacher. And then, you know, when I was, you know, first, second grade, I thought I wanted to paint, and then they made me feel really bad. And so I took up music and I never went back to painting. It's like, but I really, really like what I made today. And he's like showing it to his friends and stuff. And like that just makes me feel alive.
That's amazing. Do you have any artists that you look to for inspiration when, as you've been like developing this practice spiritually or stylistically?
Sure. Well, I can't not talk about Hilma.
Of course, tell us about Hilma.
I can't not talk about Hilma. I think there's a lot of artists aesthetically and stylistically that I really, really like. And tell you the truth, like most of them, you know, except for maybe like Agnes Martin, and, you know, most of them were men. And in 2018, I was in New York with a couple of friends, and we were just, you know, like doing a week-long trip for funsies. And my friend had heard about this exhibit, and she, you know, was like, oh, you gotta come, you know. I kind of was like hesitant because, you know, it's like when you're an artist, I think a lot of people who don't really understand your specific thing, they want to like show you things that they see, and it's not always something that you're gonna like enjoy. She's like, no, this one you gotta come to. I'm like, okay. So I go, and yeah, and it was Hilma af Klint's retrospective, it was Paintings for the Future. And I saw this woman who had just done abstract paintings that I felt like could just like span the entire like narrative of abstraction that we know now. And I looked at the way that she worked, and I just cried. I just cried because I had always heard of, you know, Kandinsky is like the guy that started the thing. And it turns out this woman, you know, more than 30 years prior had been doing this work. And one of the things about her that I aspire to, and I don't think I'm anywhere close to there, but the amount of effort that she spent to go through the things that her connection to that extra level of consciousness gave her, and to really catalog it and really try to understand how it came to be and what it was trying to say exactly. That's somebody that I look to just for the stamina, like the amount of labor that she did. And this is all things that she was doing in secret, you know, and also while she had a full-time illustration career, like at the same time. So whenever I get tired, I think of Hilma, and I think like, you know, she could do it, I could do it.
Yeah. What a model. Well,
incredible.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk, Luz. I think everybody's gonna try to play a little bit more, at least this weekend, bring some lightness into our life. So yeah, do you have any last thoughts?
I just want to share, this is a photo from that retrospective. And I was playing in my hotel room with some watercolor that I had, you know, like a little travel kit. And I was like walking up, and this was one of the last abstract groups that she made. And it was these watercolors in the exact same palette. So when I got up there, I just had this like really intense feeling of like, wow, like this was like my little playful doodle, and like it's not that far from the thing that ends up the, you know, so it's how what we make is perceived and how we feel when we're making it. Those are two totally separate things that have nothing to do with each other. And the more that we separate that, I think the more fun we have. I'll let it go here, but I do have some ideas for you. You know, if you, I don't know if we have time, but I do have a few little notes to share. These are just the paintings that I've been working on recently, but I'll push through them. If you want to take a little screenshot of this, these are just some little things that you can do to include more joy in your day-to-day, should you want to.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone screen cap this. Tips for more play, and follow Luz. If you go to her website, I'm sure you can find out about upcoming workshops that you can take so that you can learn these techniques. So we'll be sad to see your show leave NUMU, but I know that you'll be back soon for a workshop at NUMU, I'm sure. And I'd like to also thank the Borgnick Foundation for supporting in their Artist Studio series, and Michelle for putting this program together. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending.
Both.
All right, have a good weekend.